Hey, thanks for joining me for another meditation hour session. And earlier today, I finally read the Outlier books from Malcolm Gladwell. I know it's it's a decade-old book, 11 years to be precise, and this has been on my book list for a long time. But I'm so glad I finally get a chance to read over this book, and I made some notes, and it's fascinating. Malcolm Gladwell is a very interesting author. I recently heard his interview on a podcast with Jordan Harbinger. Check that out. It's a very interesting conversation altogether. So I've been hearing about this book for a real long time, and when I get a chance to kind of get hold of the book and read it through, I couldn't wait to complete all the chapters and see what points Malcolm is making over here. And he does make a lot of interesting points, and he talk about the outliers in various parts of the I would say skill set. I mean, there are outliers in sports, there are outliers in music, there are outliers in entertainment industry, outliers in stand-up comedy, outliers in martial arts, outliers in athletics. There are like outliers in academics, outliers in physics. I mean, you name it, right? There are outstanding people. And what are the common factors? How does these people become outliers altogether? So he tried to create, or he tried to make his case based on different examples and different factors which add for a person to become an outlier. And I personally like the I would say the concept of being an outlier, because that means that you're not following the regular norms of the society. Because listened it on some podcast long time back, which I don't recall right now, but the conversation in that podcast was to figure out what all the people are doing and see why they are doing it and do precisely opposite. Because if you follow people doing the same thing, and if it's not your thing especially, then you will end up having the same results as the other people. So for an example, if you want your life to have a fixed, say, 9-to-5 kind of job, and then retire at the age of 65 or 70 or whatever the retirement age may be, and then spend rest of your life burning all the money you saved for your retirement. If that's what your life goal is, then it's perfect to live that life goal. And if that's not your life goal then see what other people are doing who came out of that 9-to-5. I would say, I don't want to be super political, but who came out of that 9-to-5 job. So follow them instead of following the 80% of the people in the society in general. So outliers are the people who do things in a very very unique and interesting way. That's a general definition, but I'm gonna go through some of the notes I took from Malcolm's book, which are really fascinating. So in the very first chapter, he talked about the Matthew effect, which is a verse from the Bible, I believe, and he recited the verse, which is, if you have more, you'll get more. That's basically the summarization of the verse, that if you have more, you'll get more. And if you have less, things will be taken away from you, which is the reality. So if you look at the society in general, people who have more, that's the reality. So if you look at the society in general, people who have more, that's the reality. So if you look at the society in general, people who have more, that's the reality. So if you look at the society in general, people who have more, that's the reality. So if you look at the society in general, people who have more, that's the reality. So if you look at the society in general, people who have more, more money, they end up getting more money. And people who don't have more money or who has less money, they end up getting poorer and poorer because everything is taken away from that. And that's the generic rule of the universe or of the world, I guess. That's why, you know, a lot of spiritual teachers and whatnot kind of like, you know, just drawn to this, and a lot of influencers, I mean, just not going to spirituality, but a lot of influencers talk about adapting the abundance mindset instead of scarcity mindset for the precise reason, because when you adapt the abundance mindset, you look at things in a various way, and you will see more abundance in the universe. And when you look at the things from scarcity mindset, then you're trying to latch on to whatever the little you have, and sooner or later you're gonna start losing that little thing you have as well. So that's a takeaway in some sense, to change the mindset and adapt to the abundance mindset. In the next chapter, he talked about 10,000 hour rules, in which he said, more time you spend on anything, the better you'll get at it. And this is not a rocket science. This is really, really straightforward. The more time you spend on anything, you get better at it. And that's, again, is also a universal truth or law in some sense. If you just spend more time in thinking, let's just say, some negative thought, you will be reciting that thought forever and ever and ever, and you're going to become so good at reciting that thought that even if something positive come along in your life, it will automatically drawn towards that negative thought. And likewise, universe, you know, the patterns in the universe, it's very straightforward. The more you do, the better you get. You'll get at that skill, positive or negative, because it's independent of that. If you cultivate good habits, you get better at that skill set. If you cultivate bad habits, you'll become addict to those bad habits. So pretty straightforward. In the third chapter, he mentioned about how creativity is greater than IQ level. And the interesting examples he gave was because creativity is thinking outside the box and thinking about making connections which are not obvious in some sense. And IQ is in some sense knowing anything in depth. I'm being unfair by saying IQ is knowing anything in depth, but if I have to kind of draw the if I have to just to give an example or generalize it, then creativity in general is like knowing a lot of things and creating connections between those, whereas IQ is more in the sense knowing one concept like really, really well. And there are people who are amazing at knowing one concept to the level that they end up mastering that concept and becoming better at that. The other point which he made in that chapter was that practical intelligence, which is to know what to say to whom, knowing when to say it, and knowing how to say it for maximum effect. It's pretty strong. And the other point he made was no one, not rock stars, not professional athletes, not software billionaires, and not even geniuses ever makes it alone. This was one of the strongest line in the entire book, which kind of stuck with me, and that's that kind of speaks about the importance of creating social capital and networking all together, to kind of being a team player and working with the team. And I must confess, I'm not the best team player out there. I know there are a lot of amazing people who work well with teams, but the idea is to kind of become better at that, right? So because we are social creatures and we work better and we attain success when we work with other people. This reminds me of one of the thoughts I had a while back, which is there are two ways to become rich. Either you're making money off others or you're making money with others. So you can pick which one you want to choose. In the next chapter, Malcolm talk about the lessons from ethnicity, like what are the advantages you have based on your background. So he talks about autonomy, complexity, and a connection between effort and reward. These are the three qualities that work has to have to be satisfying. Work that fulfills these three criteria is meaningful. Hard work is a prison sentence only if it doesn't have meaning. And he also says, if you work hard enough and assert yourself and use your mind and imagination, you can shape the world to your desires. And the other point he makes is success is not a random act. It arises out of a predictable and powerful set of circumstances and opportunities. And in the next chapter, he talked about the ethnic background. So I probably messed up when I said that. It was a previous chapter. So when he draws when he talk about like various examples how different cultures and ethnicities kind of create these opportunities and situations which eventually lead these outliers to become who they are. And he talk about examples from various cultures. So one of the points he makes is that cultural legacies are powerful forces. They have deep roots and long lives. They persist generation after generation, virtually intact, even as the economic and social and demographic conditions that spawned them have vanished. And they play such a role in directing attitudes and behavior that we cannot make sense of our world without them. And the other point he makes is how are these attitudes passed down from generation to generation? Through social heritage. Through social inheritance. Think of the way accents persist over time. And this made me kind of ponder and try to think back of my cultural background, of my ancestors, where they came from, and how they moved from one state in India to another state, I don't know, maybe like a couple of 100 years back, and how they created this whole businesses and other opportunities in a new place altogether, and how are those values and morals are kind of passed through from generation to generation, which have been trained in some sense during my childhood as well. And some of those are really helpful, which creates the value system within me, and some of them are pretty outdated, and hopefully I've replaced them, or I'm trying to replace them. So these cultural values have very strong hold in our lives, and it persists over generation to generation. And this is very interesting chapter where he dived into the ethnic theory of plane crashes, giving an example of various plane crashes. Specifically, he talked about Korean Airlines, which for a period of time were having a lot of airplane crashes within small window of time, and he dived into the depth of what is the reason for that, and how cultural backgrounds play a major role within that, and the research which he did, backed up by other researchers, of course, was that during most of these plane crashes, the captain and the first officer have different level of power dynamics, and if you are from a specific culture and have different level of power dynamics, then as a subordinate you choose not to be direct with your supervisor, which is actually very strong in India as well. I recall like how you're supposed to give respect to people who are your supervisor, which has changed now dramatically because of MNC and whatnot, but you can still find it in a lot of suburban places, or even in a lot of villages and towns, where people ought to give respect to superiors or supervisors. And for that matter, the caste system is the best example, if we are talking about that, where the so-called inferior caste are supposed to give more respect to so-called superior caste, which is a whole different conversation I don't want to get into. But he talked about mitigated speech, which refers to an attempt to downplay or sugarcoat the meaning of what is being said. We mitigate when we are being polite, or when we are ashamed or embarrassed, or when we are being deferential to authority. So basically, not just speaking your mind clearly, but to sugarcoat it, to kind of in some sense to hide personal embarrassments, or just being polite, or hide personal shame, which depends in context to context, right? Of course, when I'm speaking with my parents or other respectable people, then I sometimes sugarcoat it. I sugarcoat it because I don't want to be direct and come across as rude. But if I'm speaking with someone stranger, and if I'm not speaking it directly, then that's a miscommunication. Because if I don't know any person, and if I don't know if they're gonna get my hint, instead of like addressing a point clearly, if I just start speaking in analogies and hint, the other person may not get it. So there is a room for miscommunication. So that's pretty much what led to most of those plane crashes, which is miscommunication. The first officers were trying to address the severity of weather or the other technical difficulties, but they were addressing or expressing in a way that it wasn't direct. It was more or less, hinting or just sugarcoating, and the captain of the plane, either because of the power dynamic difference, they were just brushing off those suggestions or hints, and eventually that led to plane crashes. The other point he makes in the same chapter is that each of us has his or her own distinct personality, but overlaid on top of that are tendencies and assumptions and reflexes handed down to us by the history of the community we grew up in. And those differences are extraordinarily specific, which is the uniqueness of each one of us, right? Because we all come from our specific cultural, religious, you name it, experiences, and that gives us a very unique attribute to our overall personality. And in the next chapter, he talked about how the mindset of hardworking mindset can lead to success, and it lasts over generations and generations as well in some sense. So he was talking about the rice paddies and the connection with the math test, and how and why Asians do relatively better at math. There was one example where he kind of just had random digits, and he was driving the contrast of how English language make those digits, pronouncing those digits a bit difficult than the Chinese language, which is kind of opposite to the previous chapter, because during the plane crashes, because of the power dynamics, like for the Korean Air, the solution was to train all the employees to speak English, because English language is more direct and they don't have the same level of power dynamics like Korean language does. And that has changed the culture of the how the things operate within an airplane, and reduced significantly the plane crashes altogether, because then the first officer was able to directly express the concerns of the bad weather or technical difficulties to the captain without being constrained with the language patterns of their native culture. And in this chapter, he kind of pointed out the difficulties of English language when it comes to pronouncing. I won't say pronouncing, but the way digits are said, and how calculations are made, and how that effect eventually add up in underperforming in mathematics relative to Asians. So one of the points he made is that success is a function of persistence and doggedness, and the willingness to work hard for 22 minutes to make sense of something that most people would give up on after 30 seconds. So with the example of rice paddies and math test, he was talking about back in one of the regions in China where rice is predominantly grown. The rice farmers, they work hard, and they work for maybe 12 to 14 hours every single day, and they work pretty much throughout the year, and they work so much that they can cultivate 2 different harvests within a specific year instead of 1, because they try to and the rice itself in order to grow rice, it takes a lot of effort, so they have to give their entire time, focus, energy in order to harvest the rice, in order to grow and harvest the rice. So that persistence of approaching any problem is what give an advantage over giving up easily. And that's such a good point, and I can draw so many examples in my life where gave up relatively easily, and I can argue that some of those were things which I was not interested in, but there were few things which I was super interested in, but I still gave up. So it's a very good point that when you're persistent and when you want to give as much as you can, and if there is a very, very difficult problem, but you don't give up within 30 seconds and be persistent and work on it for say 20 minutes, 30 minutes, then even if you still don't get the answer, you still have that attitude of approaching to a problem and sticking with it to try out all the solution instead of just skimming through it and just say, okay, I don't know, so I'll just move on. So it's such a great point. So moving on to in his next chapter, he talk about this program which was started in New York, based in a relatively poor neighborhood. And this program, which I should remember because I read it pretty recently, KIPP program. And in this program, I was okay. I was trying to figure out what was KIPP, what was the abbreviation of KIPP, but yeah, I couldn't find that line. But in this program, the teachers were paying more attention in some sense, or making or the students rather were paying more attention, and they were spending more time working on the concepts. So based on some of the researches, the students who have longer vacation time, and during those vacation, if they don't participate in, say, learning new skills, kind of lag behind compared to the students who has shorter vacation time, or students who learn during the vacation as well. So the KIPP program is specifically to help out poor people or poor children to dedicate more time onto different concepts, different maths and English and social and sciences concepts, so that they can do better and get into better college and change their economic situation altogether. So one of the points he make in that chapter is that success follows a predictable course. It is not the brightest who succeed, nor is success simply the sum of the decisions and efforts we make on our own behalf. It is, rather, a gift. Outliers are those who have been given opportunities and who have had the strength and presence of mind to seize them. This one point resonated with me a lot because I feel that I'm lucky enough to have a lot of opportunities in my life, and there were plenty of times when I missed it or just didn't act on it, and there are plenty of times when I did, and I can see the difference in my life obviously. And the point he makes is that of course you have to be hardworking, you have to be persistent, and you have to give your time and focus and energy onto that one thing. But at the same time, opportunities is very, very important. So whenever you get an opportunity, seize it. because there are a lot of smart people who are not an outlier because they didn't have the same opportunities. The other point he makes is that the lesson here is very simple, but it is striking how often it is overlooked. We are so caught in the midst of the best and the brightest and the self-made that we think outliers spring naturally from the earth. But that's the wrong lesson. To build a better world, we need to replace the patchwork of lucky breaks and arbitrary advantages that today determines success. The fortunate birth date or birth months or birth year and the happy accidents of history with a society that provides opportunities for all. Yeah, that's a good assessment that most of the people are smart enough, capable enough to transform their life. What they don't have is enough opportunities or good opportunities, and those opportunities are dependent on their existing situations and the situations of their parents or past generations. So a better society would be where everyone has access to opportunities, because regardless of the outcome, equal opportunity is something we should thrive for. And in the last chapter, he kind of talked about his family background and how his parents were lucky enough that he ended up where he ended. But not just that, but how his parents were lucky, and he went back 3 or 4 generations and within his family and kind of see if any of those situations wouldn't happen, then his complete family history would have been different. So he ended up being an author, or had the opportunities because of his parents, and his parents has opportunities because of their parents, and so on. So that kind of that should definitely make you feel grateful for your heritage, regardless of the advantages and disadvantages you had. But one of the points he makes is that outliers are products of history and community, of opportunity and legacy. Their success is not exceptional or mysterious. It is grounded in a web of advantages and inheritances. Some deserved, some not. Some earned, some just plain lucky, but all critical to making them who they are. The outlier, in the end, is not an outlier at all. Yeah, so the outlier in the end is not an outlier at all, because the outlier sees the opportunities. They had the gift, they had the advantages of maybe being born in the right timeline, maybe having all the circumstances aligned in some sense, that just being plain lucky, but also having those circumstances where they can put in their 10,000 hours of work to get better at those skills and create a life for themselves. Because clearly there are people who have raised to the level of mastery from nothingness, and they did that just based on their hard work. But if they just had put their hard work and didn't had any opportunities or didn't seize any opportunities, they still wouldn't have become a master or legend or genius. So it's there are a lot of factors which make an outlier, and it's sort of random. There is no natural born outlier. There are naturally born geniuses for sure. There are people who has exceptional talents, but most of the people who turn out to be an outlier, majority chunk of them, are because of the amount of persistent hard work they put into that skill set. And I kind of enjoyed reading this book, and I would I'm sure, like, you know, people who are watching this, you guys definitely heard about this, and now I'm gonna get hands on to some of his other books after I read like the 2 or 3 books I have in my pipeline, and it would be interesting read. I'm looking forward to read more of his work. With that note, I'm gonna start meditating for the next hour, and I'll be meditating using Vipassana technique, which is to focus on my breath and body sensations. And throughout this meditation hour, at first I will just outline some of the attributes I'm looking for when I'm focusing on my breath, and then when I'm focusing on my sensations, body sensations, I'm going to do a quick body scan to outline what are some of the sensations I'm looking for when I'm, you know, meditating. And thereafter I'll keep on scanning my body, but silently, and then whenever my mind wander off, which it will every few minutes, hopefully, if not every few seconds, then I will just say it out loud to that I observed that my mind has wandered off, and I'm, you know, focusing back on the sensation. All right, let's get started. Hey Google, set an alarm for an hour from now.
There, your alarm's set for 1:20 a.m.
I observe the flow of my breath. I observe when the air touches my nostril and passes through my nostril into my lungs. And from my lungs through the windpipe and through the nostrils back into the room. I observe the expansion and contraction of my lungs. I observed that my mind wandered off. I observed the difference in temperature of my inhale and exhale breath. I'm gonna do a quick body scan from top of my head to tip of my toe. I observe that my forehead feels the temperature of the room. I observe that my right eyelid is a bit itchy. I observe that my chin is itchy. I observe there's a bit of tension on my neck. I'm gonna scan my torso and my back and my chest. I observe the tension on my back because of the posture correcting brace I'm wearing. I feel the tightness in my shoulder because of the brace. I observe that my chest and my back is touched by the fabric of my hoodie. I'm gonna scan my left hand. I observe that my left elbow is a bit itchy. I observe the point of contact between my left wrist and my left knee. I observe that I can feel the flow of the blood inside my veins or arteries on my left hand. I'm gonna quickly scan my right hand. I observe that my right hand is touching my right knee. Observe the sensation of flow of blood within my right hand. I'm going to scan my left leg. I observe the point of contact of my left bum on the cushion I'm sitting on. I observe my left knee touching my left wrist. I observe that my left leg is touching my right leg at various points. Now I'm gonna scan my right leg. Observe my right wrist touching my right knee. I observe itching sensation on my right hip. I observe the various connecting points of my right leg with my left leg. I'll continue to scan my body and focus on body sensations, and I will just say out loud whenever my mind wanders off. I observed that my mind wandered off. I observed that my mind wandered off. observed that my mind wandered off. I 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 observe that my mind has wandered off. I observe that my mind wandered off. I observe that my mind wandered off. I observed 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 that my mind wandered off. Hey Google, what's time? Hey Google, what's time?
1:15.
I observed that my mind wandered off. I observed that my mind wandered off. Hey Google, stop. Thanks for joining me for this meditation hour, and until next time, stay peaceful.